And thanks everyone for joining our talk today. Special thanks to Bruce, who, as Iris mentioned, works for our partner Medacuity in software development, specifically in medical and medical devices. So Bruce and I put together this presentation to discuss some best practices, talking about human factors and how that can roll into your design, and really what is human factors and what does it really mean. So we've got a nice talk prepared for you. Bruce, thanks so much for joining me on this talk.
No, thank you for the opportunity.
So I'm going to start and kick some things off here, and then Bruce will kind of jump in for a little bit, and then I'm going to do some closing remarks. So, you know, I have the pleasure. I've been working with Qt for about 2.5, going on 3 years, and I've had been in the medical device industry and the medical industry, MedTech industry for over 15 years. And I have the pleasure of interacting with a number of our customers, a number of people in the industry at industry events and stuff like that. So one of the things that I like to do is take it from, you know, our customer side, or the people who are developing the very innovative medical products and medical technology, whether it be, you know, highly regulated type of medical products or not so much. And so one of the things I ask is what really keeps, you know, medical product developers up at night? You know, especially when you're looking at evaluating software like Qt or other software like ours, which is commercial off the shelf. It is not necessarily specifically developed for the medical or medical device industry. But, you know, in assessing that, and putting something like Qt into your device, and also assessing, you know, a third party like Medacuity, who has their expertise in development and such, but, you know, we realize you'll have to really vet and assess our capabilities, the strength of our product. What keeps you guys up at night? And so what I found out was there's really 3 areas of risk. And this is amongst other things, but really what I continuously hear is that there are these 3 areas of risk that continue to come up. And what first is familiar to everybody: clinical risk. And what is that? That's the risk that a product will not work as it is intended. Probably that, and that's probably the number one thing on people's plate. And you know, this also speaks, of course, to patients, directly to patient safety and the regulations and whatnot. The second being human factors risk. Now, this is a risk that the product will work as intended, but potentially will not be used as intended. Then, of course, you know, as we connect our devices and connect our hospitals, and, you know, some of the healthcare comes out of the hospitals and people being monitored, or the push for people to be monitored outside of a hospital, outside of a care center. Of course, there are cybersecurity risks, and that is the risk that product will be hacked and compromised. What we're going to focus on today is talking about this second area, this human factors risk. The risk that a product will not be used as intended, despite it may be working as intended, it will work as intended, and the cybersecurity is pretty locked down and low risk of being compromised. So when we look at this, you know, everyone is in the medical device industry, and what we do is very much focused on, obviously, the clinical risk, right? The risk that a product will not work as intended. But let's say that we do have a product that does work as intended. Everything works, but there's a risk that it's not intuitive. It's not, you know, the usability of it is not very high. So the question I pose is that what is the value of a product working as intended if it's not used as intended? And so what we're going to talk about today is the criticality of human factors, and that, you know, it is, I would say, as important as clinical risk, because if something is not used as intended, there is still risks to the patient safety, you know, risks to the users and so forth. So let's take a look. Who are the users? You know, human factors really counts on people who are using the products, using the device. It's about their user experience. So we say users. Who are these users? And so historically, when you talk about medical devices, and let's just talk about medical devices. Historically, it's doctors, it's nurses, it's technicians. So, very educated people, people who've had a bunch of training, maybe not in technology, but has, been trained in medicine, or, when it comes to users, and technologists have been trained in technology before. This is historically who would be our users. But now, when we look at 2019, 2020, and beyond, this user base becomes far more varied, far more extended. And so we not only have the doctors and the nurses and the technicians, but you can have, healthcare providers, home healthcare providers, people that are in critical care centers, family members who are caregivers, and yes, the patients themselves. Because now, as we're moving forward to people taking care of and taking control of their own healthcare and managing their own healthcare, we are no longer patients. We are consumers of healthcare. And so this archetype, the different types of people that could be your users and using a medical device, is vast and varied. They come from different walks of life. They come from different cultures. They can have different varying levels of education. And so when you're designing medical devices, you not only have to keep the historically based users happy and being able to make a device that's intuitive and understandable and logical and adoptable for these folks, but now you have so many more people that are in the mix, and different, and also varying age groups, right? So our baby boomer, our oldest and probably largest section of the population, is getting towards elderly care. These people would have to be able to potentially use some sort of a device, as well as a millennial who's in their 20s. So very vast experience, very vast levels of comfortability. So the push for healthcare is becoming personalized, and patients are now managing their own healthcare. So that means there are more users, there are different types of users, and it's not really the doctors and nurses who are really managing this. It's the patients or the families or the loved ones or the care providers themselves who are managing this, and the nurses and the doctors are now becoming, a part of that ecosystem, who would be using the different devices and the different technologies that are going to be leveraged to help and care for and potentially save a patient's life. So when we're looking at human factors and we're looking at, making these devices ready and adoptable and usable by people, this becomes more complex as we move further and further into the future.
So, yeah, I was just to jump in here, Roger, and say that diversity of user base that you're talking about really drives the key nature of looking at usability. As you mentioned earlier, just having a device that works may not be enough anymore. I mean, it's traditionally medical devices have targeted a specific need at a very high level, very technical level. Usually requires a lot of training and expertise. But as you described, we're driving things are driving down into less professional environments, and so usability becomes a key factor in developing these kind of software products and devices. And when we talk about a device being usable, it really affects a lot of things. It affects the safety of the device. Okay, can the user hurt themselves or somebody else using this device inappropriately? And then you have to consider, is the device effective? Can the user get the device to do what it's supposed to do? And finally, those first two are deal with the sort of medical application device, but then as a product, you also have to consider, will the device ever get adopted if it's so difficult to use? And this sort of maps back to the usability risks that Roger was talking about earlier. And I kind of want to break this down a little bit into both the sort of traditional real risk management aspect of this that we talk about in the software world, which is the concept of use errors, that an operator might make a mistake using the software. I do want to differentiate this concept from a term that's much more commonly used and maybe more familiar, which is user error, which kind of implies the user messed up, right? They did something wrong, and therefore, the whole failure or the whole situation is the fault of the user. Use errors is a different concept. It's looking at the device, and the fact that a use error occurred with a device is a problem with the device, not with the user. And that's really a paradigm shift that we're seeing in the medical software world, where the onus is really being placed on the device developers to understand that and not blame the user when something goes wrong. The other aspect of the risk is more of the product risk, where if you have a device that's really difficult to use and unintuitive, that the people in the home environments, in the home healthcare environments, the non-clinical environments are much more apt to just choose a different product. When we're talking about things where there may be multiple choices out there, and poor usability is just going to drive people away from that product. And word is going to get out very quickly that, don't use product A, use product B, because it's much more easy to use. And frankly, a device, if it doesn't get used, it simply can't be effective. And that's really the purpose of a medical device, is to effectively deal with a medical situation. And so usability becomes a key aspect for both those areas.
Yeah, and Bruce, I just want to jump in. What you're saying about adoptability, not only at the home, but also in the clinical and hospital level. These nurses, these doctors are giving feedback on their products, right? The products that they're using. So, if a product is not adoptable, if a product has problems with its usability, or they just have to use too many hackarounds or workarounds, or, the alarming is too sensitive, or, zillion other things, this might push them to go to another product versus the product that they're working with currently.
Oh, absolutely, yes. But usability will drive adoption anywhere where there's a choice. When nurses give feedback to the purchasing department that products from company A are impossible to use, that's gonna matter. So what this does is it really drives us towards a concept of designing usability into products and software. And this is really a sort of a paradigm shift for a lot of development organizations, to shift the focus away from just what the technology can do, towards considering what the users need that technology to do for them. And that really brings us into a sort of a holistic approach to usability and human factors in the design, where you're not just concerned about what the device does, but how users are going to get it to do that. And that's really a design aspect of your device. And the mantra out there now is to design usability into your device. And the corollary to that is to design out use errors in the process. So they're kind of two sides of the same coin. It has to be, if it's usable, it's less likely that somebody is going to have a use error using that product. Since we're talking about medical devices, you really can't have a presentation on medical devices without at least mentioning regulations. The good news here, though, is that the guidance that we get from the FDA and other regulatory organizations is pretty much asking us to do exactly what I've just been talking about. It's asking developers and development organizations to really step back and think about how their software is going to be used by their user communities, and to think about who the people are who are going to be using this software, what are their capabilities, what are their limitations, what limitations maybe does the environment impose on that product and how it's used, and to really as a prompt to get organizations to think beyond the local experience of the development floor, where you're really, as a software developer, I've experienced this. You sort of get heads down on the technology and say, okay, I'm working on this, and I'm going to get this piece of technology to do things in a fabulously efficient way. But I may not be thinking about how that person out in the clinical floor or in their home is going to actually get my device to do that. And so what the regulation's really driving us towards is what they call a systematic human factors analysis. And when we start to talk about what that means, yeah, go ahead, Roger. Well, actually, before I get into that, I do want to define a couple of terms. I'm trying not to make this presentation super technical, but when you start digging into some of the regulatory guidance and some of the literature on usability, you're gonna come across a couple terms. It's useful to know what they're referring to, and particularly when we talk about human factors analysis and usability studies. There are really two basic kinds of usability studies that people talk about a lot. The first one is what we call formative, and I remember this by it's what you do when you're forming your ideas for your product, and it is the process of building prototypes, putting them in front of users, getting feedback, and all in sort of a very lightweight, early in the design process to get inputs to your design. The other aspect of usability studies is what's usually referred to as summative, which is sort of the sum total of your product. You're now entering into your verification and validation phases where you're pretty sure that you're done and have got what you need. And it's a much more heavyweight process, and you hopefully have done your homework through the formative studies so that you don't find issues there. Human factors, when we talk about human factors, which what we're doing, and we do a lot, is really talking about everything to do with how human beings interact with technology. And we tend to think of it as terms of user interface, but it's really everything about the human capabilities of the people who are interacting with our device. It can be the physical capabilities, how do they touch the buttons? Do they use buttons? Do they use swipes? It could be sensory. Do they get tactile feedback? Things like that. But it can also be the emotional reactions to something. Do particular colors convey particular urgencies and things like that? And finally, of course, there's the intellectual interaction with it. Are the users getting the knowledge they need and the information they need out of the device? And that all leads into usability, which is really taking all that information you've gained from this and really establishing effectiveness and efficiency in your user interfaces that lets users learn how to use their device and be satisfied with that device with a minimum of effort and obstacles. So what then do we mean by human factors analysis? Well, the regulatory guidance really breaks it out as three main goals. The first is to really understand how your device is going to be used. Not just what it's going to do, but how it's going to be used. And then take that knowledge and understanding you get and use it to drive the design of your software or your device that will match those capabilities and limitations of the users that you've gained your understanding of. And throughout this process, we want to go back to that mantra of designing out use errors. So as you're going through and you're building that design and thinking about how users are going to use it, it's really important to understand not just what can go right, but what can go wrong, what could be misinterpreted, and really design that out of the software. Design that potential for misunderstanding out of the software.
Yeah, and Bruce, and one comment I'd like to make too is that we shouldn't be afraid of discovering errors. This is what this exercise is all about. We want to discover these use errors. We want to, embrace that and eliminate that, especially when you're really in the front of your design, right? You're kind of, your developers are trapped in their own head, so to speak, and they're really looking at it from their perspective. The more perspective you get, the more chance that you want to find where those hiccups are that you may not be able to see, but others be able to see. So I think some people are like, oh, there's a use error, and that means that my device isn't a good device or isn't well designed. designed. No, we're now trying to move into being adoptable. So I think developers, designers, folks making these devices should embrace the feedback and look at that as a positive as how they can make this better.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, this is a process we're talking about, and it's a process to develop good software and good devices. So that as you just mentioned, Roger, that's a perfect segue here. The important piece here is that this has to happen early on, or has to start happening early on. Human factors analysis really has its bang for its buck early in the design process, where you can identify those issues that your users might have and incorporate remedies into the design before you've started coding, before you've started building mock-ups and things like that. You can go pick up virtually any software development text and find a cost-benefit curve of fixing problems early in development cycles, and that certainly applies to usability issues as well. And I do want to point out here that late-stage workarounds that commonly have been applied to usability issues. Things like adding descriptions in users' manuals, putting warnings in users' manuals, putting labels on things, these sort of Band-Aid kind of fixes that happen when something's discovered late in the process. The regulatory guidance for medical devices is really very clearly saying that's not acceptable anymore. That when things like that are discovered, just telling somebody don't do that really isn't enough. You've got to go back and redesign your software so that can't happen. And clearly that becomes a much more expensive process if you wait until you're summative testing at the very end to find these things. So how do we go about accomplishing this? There's really kind of four broad categories of usability testing or human factors analysis. And it really starts with what we call use error and task analysis. And this is a process, I won't even call it a software development process. This is product designers, product owners, sitting in a conference room with a whiteboard, brainstorming how users are going to use their device to perform tasks, to analyze how they're going to get things done, how they might interact with the device. And even at this phase, you start to think about how can they make a mistake? What could go wrong here? And really start to use that to drive even your initial design. Once you get an initial design, then you can start almost immediately building prototypes of that design. Early prototype and usability evaluation is that process of building a prototype, putting it in front of users, getting the feedback, bringing that back, updating your prototypes, updating your designs, taking it back to the users. Through that process, you want to get that sort of feedback loop going that really drives the user's perspective into your designs and into your development process. Once you've iterated on that to the point where you feel like you've got it, right? You're happy, your users and your focus groups are happy, they can do what they need to do, then you're ready for formal usability testing. This is sort of that summative testing we mentioned earlier, where you're really taking your almost finished product and verifying and validating its performance and validating the usability as part of that. And that's where formal usability testing comes in. The last phase here really is aftermarket. It's understanding that once the product goes out the door, usability analysis doesn't stop. No matter how good your formative testing is, no matter how good your summative testing was, when your product gets out in the wild, some user somewhere is going to do something you never expected them to do, and do something in a way you never expected them to do it. And it's important to monitor that and understand that and use that as feedback into your next generation, your next revision of the product. It essentially becomes the use error and task analysis for the next version. And sources for that could be formal studies. They could be surveying your field service reports for patterns of problems being reported. There's lots of different ways that can happen. Well, the end result here is that each of these steps by themselves is good. It's important. It provides you good information, but by themselves they're not sufficient. They really need to be used together to build that foundation for a safe and usable system. So if we start to look now at how this fits into the development process, we have a goal that I've kind of laid out in a flow here, where we take all that research we've done. We come up with a design that we're ready to test. We go to the formative user testing. We redesign our software. We leverage that research throughout the development process. We iterate on things. We iterate on the usability and the human factors testing. And we implement changes to that design based on the testing. It's a feedback loop. And this feedback loop really minimizes the risk when you go to that much larger, much more expensive, much more formal human factors testing at the end that's going to pop you out with a final product. Unfortunately, this runs into reality. And the reality that we run into is that performing user testing, building prototypes costs time and money. And whenever you're spending time and money, there's pressure to spend less of it. And so the result, what we find is there's pressure to build fewer prototypes and do less iteration on that. When you have fewer prototypes and you don't take it to your users as often, what tends to happen is the easy things get fixed, the colors, the wording of things. But the more challenging things that might require you to redesign your software, because you're doing this later and less often, it's more expensive to go back and redesign your software. So the path of least resistance tends to lead you out into that summative testing with problems still in your software. And so then you're faced with the choice of either go back to square one, very expensive, or to try and explain away the problems. Maybe that user group wasn't really representative, or the lighting in the room wasn't optimal, so that's why they couldn't see that. And they sort of explain away things and go ahead with your product. And what's happened here is not only don't you have the best product you could have, but you've really lost the investment you made in your usability testing. You haven't gained the value. You did usability testing, you did formative testing, you did summative testing, but you really didn't get any value out of it. You're really just checking the boxes. So the solution to this is to use a development framework that really facilitates this process. What you want to get out of is that throwaway prototype model, where you're building a mock-up, you're building something in a tool that really doesn't lead into your product. When you build something, the things that are throwaway, that's money wasted. That's where the pressure you don't want to build as many of those because they cost too much. But if your framework is such that you can start building prototypes that are initial implementations of your user interface that will evolve from prototypes into your product, then that feedback loop can be part of your continuous development cycle, where you redesign items, you build a new version of your user interface, you put it back in front of users. And if you're in that kind of dynamic loop, you can almost do it real time. What do you think of blue? Okay, tap, tap, tap. Here it is in blue. That's sort of the goal, and the way you could really realize that investment out of your testing. And that by realizing that investment, you really can ensure that not only do you get value, but you also get a good product out of the end. You get the best overall user experience you can by tightening up that iteration loop and really making sure that things move along.
Well, it's funny, Bruce. Qt makes a framework, and yeah, full disclosure, everybody.
We knew that.
Yeah, we're talking about this, and obviously Qt has a solution, and what I'm going to do is give you some insight to how we approach this and how our tool handles this. And there's a wide variety of options for you to program and stuff. I'd like to take about 5 minutes and just give you a little information about how we do it. And so, in this presentation, obviously, our approach not only to the medical industry, but we're across, Qt is used across 70 different industries. We really look at this developer designer workflow, the ability to iterate, and trying to solve that problem that our customers have by providing the tools and the libraries and the platform to actually get that done. Bruce had said, talked a lot about iteratively prototyping and redesigning. That's one of the hiccups. What we're hearing from customers is, I would really love to design this in, or this feedback is wonderful, but it takes too damn long. It's just taking too long to do it, and I got to, kind of almost start up the process again and kind of dive in, and it's not weeks to fix, it's months to fix or longer. And so this kind of is where the hesitation starts. So at Qt, our product and what we do, we try to make it easier to iteratively prototype and redesign. So the first thing, and for some of you out there that may be familiar with our software, from our inception in the mid-90s, we've always had these pre-built libraries enabling drag and drop, and what you see is what you get development. So it's not coding every box and every design element from scratch. There's these pre-built libraries that are there, and again, drag and drop type atmosphere to really quickly design and then redesign. And then we have some design tools in there, one being the Design Studio, which I'll talk about a little bit more, which actually helps facilitate this even more. And then really, the option to, and what we could do very easily with, because Qt is cross-platform, because you can compile it to any OS and any hardware environment, you can prototype on the target device. So let's say, it is a tablet like this person is holding here in this picture. That form factor, the resolution, the size, the field of operation is specific to maybe the final device, where using an emulator or a simulator may not be, as close to real to what the real finished product is. So this is what we're talking about by, being able to leverage one prototype to the next, to not have to throw away prototypes because, geez, that was on the emulator and it was on a 4K screen, and now I'm on this smaller tablet size with lower resolution. Gee, it just, what I saw in the simulator and the emulator doesn't compute here, and geez, now we have to even consider more redesigns because we didn't do it on the target device. So these are some of the things that Qt enables our developers and the entire development team to do. So I mentioned Design Studio, and that's one of our newer products. And you can iterate quickly and fix easily with Design Studio. So Design Studio actually connects the designer and the developer workflow. So you have your graphic designers that may be, let's say, drawing on a napkin sketch, and that napkin sketch then gets, kind of put into like Photoshop or into Sketch, right? So now you have a mock-up that was maybe a drawing, now you have it in Photoshop and Sketch. Well, through the Design Studio, that Photoshop or Sketch file can be uploaded and the code is automatically generated. So what you're doing is each graphical element can be represented more closely to its concept because of the automatic, code processing when you upload Sketch and Photoshop, and we're actually adding more compatibilities to other types of design tools. So the ability to match the mock-up drawing to the developed UX. And then you can also re-import. You can choose to change things in the code, so you get some feedback and you can use those drag and drops and do things in the code. Or you can go back and redraw it in Photoshop and redraw it in Sketch and import those differences. And then there you go. Now you're iterating your design quickly and easily, much more so than recoding it from scratch. And then within that environment, this is a dashboard, Design Studio, where both a developer and a designer can work simultaneously. And the designer doesn't have to know anything about coding. And the developer, the one coding, doesn't have to know anything about Photoshop or Sketch, but it connects them in this harmonious environment where they can do quick tests and kind of live previews before they compile to the target device and start their prototyping on the device. So we're trying to facilitate that workflow to be quick, efficient, still informative, still ability to build a safe and effective environment. So that's Design Studio. And then the rapidly prototyping, I know I talked about this a little bit already, but then you can iterate quickly and identify those issues early and easily. Prototyping is in real space. It's in the same form factor, resolution, look and feel that users would use or that you're planning to use at the end result. Now, let's say your form factor was a 4-inch screen, just as an example. And all of a sudden, the user's using it, saying, "Man, the 4-inch screen is too tight. We need to go to a 10-inch screen." You can compile to the 10-inch screen, or if it's on a different type of hardware or whatnot, it's okay. The code in Qt is reusable. It's reusable across numerous OSs, numerous platforms. The real idea here is to allow you to identify these issues, be able to fix them quickly, iterate the next design out, and let them take a look at that. And so this iteration, as Bruce had said, can be in real time. So you're identifying the actual issues and prioritizing, triaging those issues to be fixed. And as Bruce had mentioned, we're trying to get away from, or the industry and the regulation and the regulators are trying to get away from, hey, we're going to explain away all the risk, right? Our bottom line, or what the option when it gets late in the game is, our only option is to explain away the risk. Well, you don't have to, but there still might be instances where, yeah, that risk should be in a label or something. Now you have you're not forced to be driven to that option. You have an option to redesign, or if a label works and that's the right decision, great. So we talked about the ease of developing a user interface and a user experience and being able to test that. But a user experience is not just the user interface. It's how the device is being used in an environment. So we do have something called the Safe Renderer that actually enables a better user experience when working with safety critical displays. A little bit about the Safe Renderer. It is our ISO IEC 62304 and 61508 certified tool. It renders the safety critical UI. It controls the hardware composition of graphic planes. It monitors the correct operation of the non-safety critical UI. It disables the non-safety critical UI if an error is detected in its operation, and will try to restart and reboot if there's a failure detected. What does all that mean? At the end of the day, if there's a failure in the software that causes the display to malfunction, whether it be blue screen of death, a reboot, a miscommunication, what is rendered in the Safe Render that's marked safety critical will continue to be displayed and continue to be displayed accurately, while the non-safety critical stuff, you're fixing, you're rebooting, or hey, you may be able to swap out the machine, as well. So what does this mean to human factors? What does this mean to usability? If you've heard me speak before, I use this example, so I apologize for being repetitive, but this is kind of the crux of now creating a great user experience and a great user environment. So I had the opportunity to interview a director of bioinformatics and an actual anesthesiologist, practicing anesthesiologist from UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles. And we started talking about this, and I introduced the Safe Renderer to him, and he said, you're never going to replace a backup system in a medical device, right? We have backup systems, despite if there's a failure in the device, there's always the backup systems are built in. This won't replace it, okay? But imagine yourself as a nurse or a doctor, and you're in an operating room, and the patient is on the table, and they're open for surgery. They're under anesthetic, okay? There might be, including the anesthesia machine, there might be another 6, 7, 8 devices, 10 screens around in the operating room around the patient. The backup system for that anesthesia device is the digital display fails, goes down, goes blank. What the anesthesiologist will do is go and actually make, by hand, control the valves, mechanical valves, and look at the needles to make sure that there's enough oxygen going to the patient, and at the same time, the patient is still under the anesthetic. But you still have the nurse and the doctor sitting there on the patient, and the screen goes down, and what's the first thing that happens? Panic. That's a bad user experience. The minute that the heart of the nurse or the doctor goes in their throat when they see a display that should have critical information, critical to that patient, go blank, there's a panic. That's a bad user experience, and I can tell you that now the focus of the doctor or the nurse is no longer on the patient, it is on that screen that's failing. Now we have a problem. Now the patient safety is compromised. So what does a safe renderer do? Now let's bring the safe renderer in. Let's see that same screen has critical information on it. O2 concentration, end-tidal CO2, anesthesia, anesthetic concentration, heart rate, blood pressure. Let's say those different things are now put into the safe renderer and the screen fails. Okay, maybe the EKG waveform is not there. It's not supported, unfortunately. The end-tidal CO2 waveform is not supported. But that number, you can see the number of the percentage of oxygen, the end-tidal CO2, the heart rate. You could see that the patient still has a heart rate, that they're still getting enough oxygen, that the anesthetic is still going to keep them under. Well, that panic is now greatly reduced. Now you can say, okay, I can see the patient is still safe. My focus can still be on the patient, and we could do something, either reboot the device, swap it out, or whatnot. There's a better user experience. So what we have to offer at Qt is not just the development environment and being able to iterate and drive to that best user design, but we also have tools that can create a better user environment. So to recap, it is up to you to plan for usability and human factors testing. If you are a medical device manufacturer, there are certainly standards and requirements by which to perform human factors testing. Qt provides an environment where you can make changes quickly and efficiently. We talked about the design tools, the rapid prototyping, and other things. Our partner Medacuity can provide software engineering expertise to help deliver safe, effective, and usable products to market. And that's why there's such a great partnership between Qt and Medacuity. And Qt Safe Render is not only a safety critical tool, but also one that can provide a better user experience. So our final thought, the end goal of human factors testing, summative and formative usability testing, should not just be passing the tests. Rather, it should be converging to the best possible and most adoptable device design. With that, I'd like to just extend my thanks to Bruce once again for joining me on this presentation and during this webinar. Here's some upcoming events that we have. We will be, Qt and Medacuity will both be at the MedTech convention by AdvaMed in Boston at the end of the month. But then, there's some other areas and opportunities to come and meet us. We welcome you folks to stop by and say hello. So here's some of our events that we have, and they can all be found at this web link. And just want to say thanks. Thanks to Bruce. Thanks to everyone joining us. And we're going to open up the floor for questions and answers.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. It's been a pleasure, and hope it's been informative to our listeners.
Okay, great. So once again, if you have a question, please feel free to type it in the Q&A section. We have about 10 minutes or so to answer some questions. Bruce, I've got a first one that came in, and I'm going to defer this one to you. So can you give a bit more insight to the formal human factors process and what is required? Meaning, and what they say here is, do any of the flow charts align with what's expected from the formal process or what's required? Can you go a little bit more into that?
Yeah, sure. The regulatory guidance from the FDA is more about getting you to think about things and really prescribing a specific set of steps to go through. Back early in the presentation, I had those slides that sort of talked about the early. I have to refresh my memory on the terminology. The use error and task analysis is the early prototype evaluation, the formal testing, and the post-market testing. Those are sort of the broad categories that the FDA's guidance lays out for you. But it's not a regulation, it's a guidance to software developers. And I could actually provide the link for that in the chat if people are interested. And it really comes down to asking you to think about your users and roll that into your process. So I hesitate to sort of lay it out as a flow chart and a process and that kind of stuff. It's more of a mindset that they're trying to get software developers to think outside their box and really understand how their device is going to be used, not just what it does. I recommend anybody who's interested to actually take a look at the guidance from the FDA. It's actually fairly readable. Maybe that's just me because I've read a few of them before, but let me grab that link and I'll pop.
Yeah, we're gonna put the link in. Yeah, and Bruce is gonna put the link in our chat section. So once he does that, he will. Once he does that, he will. You guys can take a look at the link and go ahead. And he just put it in the chat section there. Okay, Bruce. So we got another question that's come up. How do you incorporate UI traceability from requirements to design details documents? How can the process you describe contribute to traceability? Traceability in the context with 62304, 820, etc. Bruce, did I lose you? Did you go on mute? Uh-oh.
Sorry. Stuck myself on mute. Okay. Take a drink of water. I didn't want to have everybody listen to that. How do you incorporate traceability? That's an execution detail. There's a lot of different tools out there. It really comes down to how you're managing your requirements, and how you're managing your designs. I've seen everything from informal spreadsheet kind of things to the full-blown products that do this, like Doors and LDRA and some of the others. The regulatory guidance really isn't mandating a specific methodology. What the important thing here is to be able to understand and explain to somebody how your requirements led to your design. And traceability is really a tool to do that. But it's more important to understand what your requirements are and how they're implemented by your design. I doubt if that actually answers the question. It's a difficult question to answer because it's one of those it depends questions. Will also depend on the safety category of your device and your level of concern for your software. But assuming you're talking about a high level, a class C level of concern, something like that, class 3 device, yep. That's where you do need to have basically the evidence that your requirements led to your designs, and that's really the definition of traceability. Traceability is sort of the mechanism by which you show that.
Yeah, and Bruce, he just typed just a follow up that it is class 3. At class 3,
I did see that. Yeah.
Okay, great.
So yeah, for that, I've worked on projects where we'll have a Doors database or something of all the requirements, and fields in there that refer to specific sections of design documents. We've even worked on projects of particularly level of concern or high risk where we want to trace that down to code and unit tests. And that how that's done usually comes down to just recording and reviewing and recording the reviews and keeping track, whether it's in a tool or in a spreadsheet. Human factors testing. The question is, do we include human factors tests in traceability? I would say yes when you're talking about summative testing, because that is going to be testing aspects of usability, particularly for a class 3 device, that you really should have captured in a requirements level specification. Formative testing I think can be more informal, because that's driving input. You want to have review commentary, so evidence and documentation of what was found in the review and how you're going to address it, or what was found in your human factors testing, your formative testing, and how you're going to address it. But formal traceability to that kind of information, I would say, is less likely. That's input into the things you're going to trace, into your requirements and into your designs. Mm. It's more akin to a design review, where you want to keep evidence of the review. It's a user interface review by your users is sort of the way I would think of it in the 62304 context.
Great. And then, there's kind of two questions which kind of go hand in hand. By the way, we're getting asked about the recording of the presentation. Yes, we will email all of the attendees a link to review this recording and the presentation on demand. So that will be provided to you folks within a day or so after the conclusion here. So a couple of, I guess, I piqued everyone's interest with the safe renderer. Full disclosure, I am not a software developer. I can speak to a little bit on the high level, but we're happy to follow up with more of a technical discussion about the code and how it works. I can certainly follow up with that with the folks that actually have designed and the coders who actually designed it. So we could certainly do a follow-up. But one of the questions here, and I can speak this on a high level, what happens to the Qt fail-safe, quote-unquote, display when the device hosting is being rebooted? So what is rendered in the safe renderer will be displayed on the screen still. So imagine, a heart rate and a respiration rate. Let's say those numbers you actually rendered in the safe renderer, they're still going to be on the screen and they're still going to be accurate. And that's what the certification to 62304 and 61508 speak to, that it will be not only still be displayed, but the numbers that are there, that is going to actually be someone's heart rate or respiration rate. It's accurate. The second thing also is that they're asking about how it kind of works. It's a layer approach. So our declarative language is called QML. What's in the safe render is actually outside of the QML code. So it's a parallel architecture, but separated and layered. So the safety critical layer is on top of the non-safety critical layer. Non-safety critical layer goes away. The safety critical layer is still displayed. That's it in a nutshell from a high level how it works. If we want to get into the actual nuts and bolts, we could certainly set up subsequent conversations with some of our developers to really get you guys talking about the operation of it and the technology behind it. How do we guarantee that the safe render will continue to play the correct information? That, again, is for our technical people. I can tell you that our certification to 62304, 61508, and other ISO 26262, which is in automotive, that the requirement is not just as displayed, but that it is accurate. So there are checks and balances in there. Again, I'm not a developer, but something we could certainly follow up in subsequent conversations with you to discuss. So apologies that I'm not a coder and I can only get so deep and so dangerous into the technology. Anyway, just as a note, and I'm going to the last page here, my email address is down there on the lower left. Bruce's, you don't have your email, Bruce.
Yeah, I thought it'd be better just to tell folks, reach out to Medacuity software.
Yep.
If you have interest in technologies like this, we can certainly help you out.
Yep, and you can actually email me, and if there's specific questions after this, we can follow up. we can certainly I can certainly put you in touch with Bruce.
Oh yeah, yeah. We work very closely, so I'll hear from Roger.
Because Bruce is a superstar. So Iris, I'll hand it back over to you. We got 3 minutes left. If you want to do some closing remarks, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. I thought it was a really great attendance and really wonderful speaking with everybody and introducing this concept.
Absolutely. Thank you, Roger, and thank you, Bruce, for joining us today, and everyone for attending the webinar. Oh, again, we will be sending the webinar recording as well as the presentation slide in the next couple of days, and we appreciate all of your questions that were asked and all the interactive activities that we had today. For any additional ones, feel free to reach out to us at qt.io/contact us, and you can also give Qt for Medical a try. Thanks, Roger, for showing the link. qt.io/medical is where you can try Qt. And I appreciate your time for joining us, and we hope to see you soon at one of our events or online again, and contact us to get in touch with your medical projects or devices and our Qt software specialists. So thank you.